Welcome back to the Jumpstart 12-Step Seminar. We're going to work on Step 3 right now, and Step 3 tells us we made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understand Him. Now, we spent some time on this through Step 2, but the question remains, who do you believe God is? Do you see Him as some spiritual being high up in the heavens, out of your reach and out of touch with reality? Do you view Him as a person or being with far too many important things on His agenda to have time for you? Or do you see Him as a mystical kind of presence that exists within our minds and within the pages of the Bible, but not in reality? Maybe you have tried to have a relationship with Him, but never really felt His presence, and have concluded that whether or not He is real, it really doesn't matter because He will never have time for you. The only way you're going to overcome your addiction, your dependency, your codependency is to do it yourself. Some people in recovery still have a really distorted view on who God is and what a relationship with Him might look like. So they put themselves in charge. They think, well, after all, if I don't take ownership of my actions, who will? One of the greatest gifts God has given each of us is free will, the ability to decide and choose what we will believe in and how we shall act. So it does take a certain amount of willpower and discipline to stay on track, but if you try to remain in control of your dependency, you'll ultimately end up right back where you started. We should have realized during Step 1 that we're powerless over our dependencies, and if you're struggling with this aspect, maybe it's time to go back to Step 1 and review the part on powerlessness. This is one of the reasons so many stumble and fall. We haven't learned to trust God. We haven't learned to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. We may have given up some old habits and attitudes, but the same willful child that got us into trouble in the first place is alive and well and living in our inner being. Again, if you have worked Steps 1 and 2, this step falls naturally into place. If you've come to the understanding you're powerless over your dependencies and your life has become unmanageable, and that there's a power greater than yourself out there, and that this power, God, can restore your sanity, you're led to make some sort of decision. Simply put, my will or thy will. Do I continue on the path I've been, the path that got me into all this muck in the first place, or do I begin to trust in a holy and awesome God who knows what I need and when I need it? Several years back, I read the book Thinking for a Change by John Maxwell. There are several great quotes from this book. One that comes to mind here: you cannot solve the problems of today at the same level of thinking that created them. Yet this is exactly what many of us tend to do. We haven't changed the way we think, which often means we haven't changed the way we act, which means the problems of yesterday continue to be problems today. We need to learn to think differently. Now stop for a moment. If the thought, I've already done this, or I'm a Christian, has popped into your mind, you'll struggle through the remainder of this step. Christians are notorious for doing what we call the Christian 3-step. This is where they never get past Step 3 in recovery because they've become consumed with the first 3 steps. This becomes your act of worship. Often people who have no relationship with God have a better grasp on what this step is about than those of us who attend services on a regular weekly basis. The steps are in a specific order for a good reason. Don't get caught up in the I'm already a Christian mode and skip the work required for this step. For me, I am an obsessive and compulsive person who is self-centered and have made choices based on how it will affect me and whether or not it will meet my needs. This is what needs to change. Some codependents struggle with this step, believing that they've never strayed. All they've done is give, serve other people, love their neighbors as they're supposed to. Well, something to understand: every addict is a codependent, but not every codependent is an addict. See, making the decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God means we do things His way. We don't do it for our own personal gain or benefit. Who God is and how you can have a relationship with Him will become clearer as you grow in your faith and mature in your recovery. Just like any relationship, whether with a family member or friend, you need to spend time with them to develop and grow the relationship. This is how you begin to know and understand each other. A relationship with God begins the same way. by spending time with each other. With God, this is accomplished through prayer, which is talking with God, and time spent in His Word, which is reading the Bible. This step says that you made a decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God, not that you've already done it. It's the decision that's important. The actual process may take some time. It's the decision to put your will aside and to seek God's will. It may be one of the most difficult decisions and choices you've ever made, but undoubtedly it'll be one of the smartest. We, humans, aren't built to carry the pains and burdens of this life. Jesus tells us this in Matthew 11:28. He says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." This is a great verse to put to memory. Jesus didn't say, "I will seek you out," or "I will fix your problems." He says, "Come to me. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." We need to make the decision to go to God, to seek His will, and to learn from Him. Understanding our need for God took place in steps 1 and 2. Now, the process of beginning and growing this relationship begins. Let me ask you a question. What would be different about your life if you did things God's way instead of your way? Picture a man who's on a journey. Before he began this trip, he planned his course of travel. He checked maps, checked with family members and friends, and had a variety of advice. After all of his planning and thought, he set out upon his journey. After he had traveled a great distance, he stopped to rest. He began a conversation with an individual he had just met, and during the conversation, he finds out that he has gone astray. The maps and the advice he received were not accurate, or he misinterpreted the information. In any event, he now knows he's in the wrong place. What should he do next? See, although we may have been on the right path or thought we knew where we were going, we found ourselves at a crossroads we never anticipated and are uncertain in which way to go. How do you proceed forward from here? Hopefully not like me. I'm the master of the shortcut, so I try to take the simplest, easiest way. That rarely works. The bottom line is simple. Turn to God. He is the only one who has your best interests in mind and loves and accepts you just the way you are, unconditionally. If you were to turn your life and your will over to God in its entirety, with the exception of one habit or behavior, what would you keep control of? Well, the answer is nothing. We need to turn everything over to God. When we let God in, we need to let Him into every part of our being. And even though many of us knew that answer, something popped into our minds when I asked that question. There's always something we want to hold back. Well, here as we turn our will and our life over, we give everything to God. James 4:7-10 tells us how to do this. It says, "Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and wail. Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourself before the Lord, and He will lift you up." The 10 commands in this passage are pretty easy to spot. Watch as we move away the words that don't belong. Submit yourselves, resist the devil, come near to God, wash your hands, purify your hearts, grieve, mourn and wail, change your laughter to mourning, and your joy to gloom, and humble yourselves. All right, it's time for small group discussion. You're going to talk about how you make the decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God, and how you continue to do so as you travel this journey. We're going to take a short break, and then after the break, we'll come back with the video section for step 4.